Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, capital markets analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today's episode, I was a guest on another podcast called Leaflife with Ricker and the Bearded Lorax, talking about the pitfalls in the cannabis industry as it pertains to publicly traded companies. So sit back, relax, and kick up your feet and enjoy.
My name is Mike Ricker. I'm your host of Leaflife, and this is my co-host, Wes Abney, also known as the Bearded Lorax. And of course, your stash leader. And there's my guy, Coke. All right, brother. So in 2018, Canada became the first industrialized country to legalize recreational pot sales. And we also saw the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approve the very first cannabis-derived drug. Meanwhile, in 2019, Illinois became the first state to legalize the consumption and sale of adult-use weed entirely at the legislative level. This year, we may see Mexico pass legislation that would establish a retail market for recreational cannabis down there. We'll also see South Dakota become the first state to vote on medical and adult-use weed in November's election. These bits of news drives stocks up. But in the same note, we've seen companies like Canada's Aurora Cannabis drop from $130 stock price to $14. Actually, it's where it is now. It was one time at $5.30. That's a lot of money lost. So how can you trust cannabis stocks? That's why we're here to discuss, in your favor, cannabis investing fails.
It's critical to understand that just because pot is green doesn't mean it's made of money, and that even though there are a lot of high hopes for how big this industry is going to get, it's all got to be grounded in real value, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned and still playing out.
Yeah, it seems like sometimes when you're buying stocks, you're buying air because there's really nothing to validate the value of that stock. So it is really a scary place to be in cannabis investing, much less the stock market in general. So in our first segment today, we will discuss from high times to low places. Definitely a pun intended. And in our second segment, buyer beware. But before we do all of that, we've got to introduce this show's guest and Greg the guinea pig.
Why do you call them Greg the guinea pig?
Oh, it's such a fun story. Back in college, should I say back in the old days, Wes? Because I tell you, it feels like it now. It feels like we live in a very different world. In fact, I think if you go to college, you're not allowed to have pets.
Is there even college anymore? I mean, it's all online.
Well, it was a co-ed dorm. Maybe it should have been a triad dorm. But anyways,
is that why there were guinea pigs allowed?
That's right, brother. So we had a guinea pig in our room, including my plant that was I think a geranium. It was called Hair. I had a David Lee Roth poster that my roommate burned. And we had a lot of weed and beer as well. And it was all very cheap. But sometimes we get some good weed. And the way that we would figure it out is we would take that bag of weed, we'd take a big, fat, giant, juicy, jiggly bong hit, blow it into Greg the guinea pig's glass aquarium. And if Greg frowned, we knew the weed was bunk and it was pressed. And we'd take it back to Tijuana and throw it on the ground, say, beat it, creep. But, by the way, this was in San Diego. If the weed was fire, we knew so because Greg smiled, and it was time to frat it up. So we bring a Greg the guinea pig on the show every week to smoke out because Wes and I don't. Stashly does now, though. You got keys to the kingdom, Stash. So this show's Greg the guinea pig is Josh Kincaid, who is the capital markets analyst with Seattle Super Chronic Consulting. Josh, welcome to Leaflife.
Thank you.
It's good to have you, man. Tell me about what you do at Super Chronic Consulting.
Super Chronic Consulting is kind of pivoted to stay relevant. So right now, helping companies across North America as an advisor, airline companies, Band-Aid companies, trying to help pivot into new markets and international. So I'm working with the World Trade Center and their export store to kind of help my clients move along with their products overseas.
And how do you guys involve cannabis?
Well, it's hemp for the World Trade Center. But obviously with strategic partners, you're able to kind of cross lines with multi-state operator licenses and agreements.
We're all about hemp, man. In fact, in Wes's and my magazine, The Leaf, which publishes in 5 states, we have a hemp column monthly written by Jerry Whiting, who was on one of our early Leaf Life episodes, Wes.
Yeah, it's a great episode. Check it out. All about hemp.
It was called, what was it called? I don't remember.
I've smoked too much marijuana for that.
So, Josh, now it's time to find out what's in Stash's stash.
And now, what's in Stash's stash? Will it land on the nug jug, the dab saucer, the vape cart, the edible, the infused drink, the inhaler, or the suppository?
Oh, yeah. Looks like the suppository. Oh, thank God, bro. It landed on the dab saucer. Close call there, brother. So what do we got in Stash today, Stash?
Today, we'll break out some wedding cake first from Refine. Seattle.
Refine, Extracted Labs, too.
It's right downtown, right down the road, actually.
Here in Soto, in the Seattle area.
And that was from material processing.
Yes, Mount Baker Gardens is a fantastic farm up in Bellingham, Washington.
Shout out to those boys.
Yeah, they make good stuff. So we've got the Leaflife dab rig. Get ready to fire it up. It was the hot dab that did me in. Rough and tumble. That's a real dab right there, Wes. Man. All right, well, let's get right in. Well, let's talk about it, fellas. Cannabis investing fails. Boy, sitting on the sidelines, watching how things have played out over the past 4 years since legalization really came into play, there have been some winners and some losers.
Well, you know, the first thing I always tell people when they ask me where they should invest their money in pot is don't hold on to your money, especially if the words, and don't ever say these words, penny stock preclude marijuana investment. You should really, really avoid that, in my experience.
Why is that, Josh?
There's a lot of risk to it. With individual equities, if you're going to put money into a company that isn't really established, there's a lot of risk. So you want somebody who has, Fortune 500 C-suite experience, who knows the distribution, consumer goods, consumer product goods. But if you look at historically up in Canada, where a lot of these companies have had access to capital and been able to expand and show us, there's been a lot of wasted money. Two of the companies I would point out, Aurora and Canopy Growth. Aurora has written off $1 billion several times. Canopy Growth just had a $1.3 billion loss. And so, it kind of shows the competition that some of these mom and pop companies have. If you think you're going to get rich, if you think you're going to invest in the next Amazon or the next Microsoft or whatever, look at some of those early investors who had billions of dollars of valuations just wasted.
And that's what we mean by from high times to low places. It really was a gold rush when this all started. And you mentioned the word risk. A lot of people were willing to take that risk because they thought the reward was going to be insurmountable and it was really just a shoe-in. All I got to do is buy this stock and I'm going to be rich.
Or all I have to do is start a company and grow weed and use other people's money to fund it. And the idea that, pot grows like money on trees is really a fundamental process of the black market where it was illegal and anything you grew had a lot of value. But in today's pot market where weed is wholesaling for $1 or $2 a gram on average, there's not a lot of money to be made on the profit side. And so these companies that are taking in billions of dollars and spending it rather recklessly, they're going to have a rude awakening in the future. And I think that that's already happening. Josh, you said that Aurora and Canopy have both written off over $1 billion. You mean in losses, correct?
Right. So that's bad investments. Aurora had some bad investments that they made and just literally wrote it off. Canopy having a loss of $1.3 billion is another issue. But regardless, what you're seeing up in North America is a massive amount of speculation where retail investors are putting money into companies that aren't vetted. A lot of these things are public relations. They're news hype, and it doesn't lead to income. And so when you have an equity situation where you just give people paper instead of cash, it can go into the newspaper as if it's a real deal. And so a lot of these deals weren't accretive, meaning they weren't synergistic after they merged. And so that's what results in $1 billion write-off.
It kind of sounds like status quo for the stock market to begin with. Aren't most stocks overvaluated? When you look at Apple, isn't it being bought at 100 times its valuation?
There are metrics you can use. And so early on, you couldn't really look at a transaction analysis because there weren't those transactions. And so you'd have to look at earnings per share. And that's exactly what you should be looking at in the tech company. Anytime you invest in whether it's Amazon or
Starbucks,
Aurora. It doesn't matter. You have to be able to look at the metrics, and the fundamentals have been fundamentals for a long time. They haven't made sense. There's been a lot of speculation, and it hasn't resulted in the bottom line for investors. They have a fiduciary duty to do the right thing, and instead these tech companies are buying stock back, for example. What that does is increase the price to earnings ratio, a metric, but it doesn't actually put value into the company. So when you invest in Amazon, for example, you're expecting some automation, some new technology, a new joint rolling machine. If you're investing in cannabis, if they go out and instead buy that stock back, what's that telling you? It tells you that they have no R&D. They have nothing to invest in, nothing to give to you, and that should be a red flag. And instead we have all-time highs, literally coming back to the all-time highs before that crash happened in March. And so I'm waiting for that next leg to drop.
R&D meaning research and development. Let's go back to the start.
Yeah, let's go back to the beginning. Pot has only been legal in a few states since 2013. And even today, Washington will sell about $1 billion worth of pot a year. 47% of that goes to state taxes. Another estimated 25% goes to federal taxes. So out of $1 billion in pot sales in Washington, we're talking maybe 250 million, 300 million actually going into companies' hands, of which there are several thousand. So for any company to be valued at billions of dollars when there's only millions of dollars even being transacted amongst thousands of companies, to me is a red flag, because the plant is only worth so much money. And as it becomes an agricultural commodity, nobody's going to pay exorbitant prices for it. So if Trump said bananas are illegal tomorrow, I don't like the color of their peels, then bananas would be really fucking expensive. But guess what? Bananas are cheap, and you can buy them for, 59 cents a pound. So we need to start thinking about cannabis as an agricultural product. And a lot of these companies, a lot of the hype that has pushed them has been based on artificially inflated numbers, artificially inflated plans to sell pot at dollar figures that don't exist. And so, if a company says we're going to sell 1 million pounds of pot at $3 a gram versus $1 million of pot at 30 cents a gram, is a huge discrepancy. And I think that's what people are waking up to, is that these companies aren't really worth what they're saying they are, and there aren't the dollar figures to back them up. And so we're seeing billions of dollars in losses on the big side, and the little companies are actually making money. So it's a strange dichotomy, and it all comes back to the idea that, investing in pot is a very risky business.
Josh, it reminds me of the .com era.
Oh, 100%. You're going to have a lot of speculation. But the thing with the .com era is you had more appropriate valuations. And so people got excited when Microsoft split, because that made the stock more affordable. When you cut the price in half and you double the number of shares outstanding, the valuation is still there. It still makes sense, and people got excited about that. That's the thing we forget now, is that the valuation isn't quite there. You can look at some cannabis companies, even in the U.S., like Curaleaf, for example. I don't think that there's a good enough valuation to justify $800 million, $900 million for some of those deals that weren't entirely arm's length, where some of the previous people in positions of power were previous employees of Curaleaf, for example. And so you're going to have some issues down the road with some of these valuations. Weed Maps having a valuation of $420 million. That's an arbitrary number, right? You're setting yourself up for failure when you don't have somebody in a position to look at the numbers, whether that's a CFO or controller or capital markets analyst. I've seen time and time again the lack of accountability to hold people to have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to make sure they're doing the right thing, and it all too often doesn't happen.
Well, and we've all seen the marijuana pitch decks from the inside, where companies claim values and claim that they're worth a lot of money, and they don't have anything to back it up. And in the real world, we call that a scam. If I come to you and I say, hey, you want to invest in my Ponzi scheme? People go to jail for that. Bernie Madoff is in jail for that. And yet these cannabis companies are running to the Canadian stock market and pushing these false narratives and pushing false numbers. And so far, nobody's gone to jail, but a lot of people have gotten rich. And I think that the best example for that is MedMen, which made huge waves as they brought in Spike Lee and produced commercials, and they bought up real estate, and then they started losing.
Spike Jones.
Spike Jones.
Yeah.
Spike Lee.
The director who directed their commercials.
they started losing hundreds of millions of dollars. And then it came out that the CEOs were giving themselves $20-30 million salaries, buying huge homes, positioning themselves for a golden parachute, even as the companies themselves were going bankrupt. And so, even in our intro, we said from high times to low places. High times in the process of acquiring several other media companies for paper transactions that were valued at a lot of money, air quotes here, but aren't actually worth anything. High times went from being $45 million in debt to $105 million in debt in 18 months while acquiring other companies with their stock. And they continue to acquire companies with stock that has no current value. And so at some point, the whole house of cards is going to fall apart. And that's kind of what's happening on a grander scale with cannabis investing.
I think I get an email 5 times a day, literally, from High Times Magazine, High Times Empire, whatever you want to call it, asking for me to invest.
Yeah.
Canopy and Aurora, they're expecting between $1.50 and $1.75 per gram on a wholesale level. And yet in in Nevada, we have a producer processor I got a pitch deck from who can cultivate at 44 cents a gram. So in the eventuality that the U.S. does legalize and you can cross borders, those companies are going to have to restructure through bankruptcy reorganization. So that's an issue for the LPs up in Canada. For companies like High Times that have built $100 million in debt and still can't publish. Just a couple of months ago, they had to cancel the publications for 2 of the magazines they have. I think Dope Magazine, High Times, and Culture.
All out of print.
Yeah, and Dope is only
Dope is out of
quarterly right now. So
Dope is out of print, and Culture's they're both out of print. They announced it with the coronavirus.
It's as scary as MedMen turning around and taking their most valuable assets, which were real estate, which is the McDonald's model, which is own your dirt, and having to sell them off to pay down liabilities in order to become renters of their own previous locations as they build a retail empire. I mean, the house of cards is coming down, and big companies think that they're going to get a certain dollar value for their products, and they're finding that value might be 10 cents on the dollar. And that makes companies unsustainable, and that makes these top-heavy businesses that have taken on millions of dollars in debt, millions of dollars in obligation, completely and utterly bankrupt. And that's why you have to watch out on these stock evaluations, because they don't match reality.
And just to make a point, this started happening in August. So some of these sale leaseback options that you were mentioning, selling your property and leasing it back, happened back in August. So there were companies that were selling assets. So Forefront, a publicly traded company, was selling their licenses in Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico, wherever they could, in order to pay off $10 million in debt. So if you're not restructuring your debt, you're selling off your assets in order to stay in business, that's not a good sign.
No, and then these companies turn around, they use those sales and they use those numbers to make it seem like they're making moves and attract the next wave of investors. And ultimately, all waves crest. And I think we're seeing a big crashing on the cannabis industry. And I wouldn't put $1 into the cannabis industry in the stock market. And I think that the second you put $1 in, it's like the South Park episode, and it's gone. Because if you're not ready to lose that money, you shouldn't have spent it in the first place.
You shouldn't put it in stocks in the first place.
Josh, now it's time for you to play. Well, we'll talk about buyer beware next and what you should avoid. But first, Josh, it's time for you to play Don't Make It Weird.
I'll try.
Okay, Josh, you have to answer 3 questions. Are you ready?
Maybe.
Question number 1. How much do you really love your wife?
A lot. I love my wife a lot. Yeah, my rock, she lets me do...
Hey, bro.
Yeah, I love her a lot.
Don't make it weird, man.
I'm sorry.
Don't make it weird.
Don't make it weird.
Don't make it weird, bro. Okay, Josh.
Yeah.
How much money does Wes make in a calendar year?
In U.S. dollars?
Wait, in high time stock.
Oh, shit. That's like millions of shares?
Hey, bro. Don't make it weird.
I'll try.
Okay. Thanks.
I got it.
Okay. Hey, don't forget, you've got another edition of Stony Baloney coming your way at the end of the show. Stony Baloney, pop culture infused. You can also get all the episodes at stony-baloney.com. Also, look us up on Instagram at Leaflife Podcast. Welcome back to Leaflife. In just a moment, we'll talk about buyer beware and investing in cannabis stocks. We'll also check in with Josh Kincaid, our Greg the Guinea Pig, and toast him up once again with another spin of Stash's Wheel. But first, it's time for Not For Nothing.
Well, not for nothing. I couldn't help but think it. Not for nothing. Not for nothing. Not for nothing. Not for nothing.
So today I was reading about this little baby gorilla in the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. He has to undergo a pretty intense surgery to repair his fractured skull.
What?
Yeah, he got involved in a little scrimmage between his mom and another gorilla and got hurt. Yeah. The zoo officials say he should recover and was already reunited with his mother.
I love the zoo.
Me too.
And I love baby gorillas because you can still cuddle them. They're little.
Aww.
It's like a little stash.
Have you ever cuddled a gorilla?
Absolutely.
What about Lorax?
Oh, I think it was a Lorax. I think it was that time when we were in Orlando and Wes sleepwalked and ended up in my bed. I was dreaming that I was at the zoo.
It only happens once.
How did he get a concussion?
It was a scrabble between his mom and another gorilla.
Really?
He got kind of in it and accidentally hit.
Has absolutely nothing to do with cannabis, Wes.
Nothing.
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 Not for nothing.
Not for nothing.
Forget about it.
Not for nothing. All right, hey, let's spin Stash's Wheel again and see what is in store for you once again, Josh.
Oh, boy.
And around it goes the suppository.
Ricker's really scared. He has to apply the suppository for you. So
Right, exactly. Fortunately, it did not land on the suppository. It once again landed on the dab saucer. I think the dab saucer is a favorite of that wheel.
I think it's a favorite of the Leaflife podcast.
And who can blame it?
Today we're going to try some Gelato 33 from Seattle Refine, extracted.
Yeah, same company.
Ooh.
Oh, yes. Refine's a fantastic company. In fact, we love them at the magazine.
And big shout out to Chatter Creative for building this beautiful packaging that you can see into.
Yeah, Chatter Creative also designs the Leaflife full-page ad that runs in our magazine every month. And boy, do they do good work. You can find them online at chattercreative.com.
Love you guys.
Are those cookie strains gelato and wedding cake?
Yes, they are. You're smoking burners. Burners, boys.
Super popular for 420 this year.
Yeah.
A lot of people were picking that up and recommending a lot of burners strains.
I know this isn't coming out for a few weeks, but I also wanted to mention he posted something online about the riots, and he does not care that people looted his store.
Really?
He has the money to pay for it all back.
True.
And he supports the cause.
Didn't he turn down $1 billion?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yes, but don't let him
Okay. Let's see that dab, bro. He's just kind of wiping and toking Wes. And that has nothing to do with the suppository. By wiping, I mean the dab tool into the banger. Dude's getting ripped. Josh, you can't even tell you're stoned, man.
That one's got a better flavor to it.
Oh, really?
I mean, they're both
Gelato.
good. They both smell really good. I feel like the wedding cake, you didn't really have a flavor to it, whereas that gelato kind of had more of an earthy,
Yeah, it smells earthy.
like I'm smoking some tea or something.
Feel free to have some more.
No, pass that my way. Yeah, I don't really dab all that often.
So-
More
so-
of a blunt guy.
So speaking of cookies, as we get into our next subject, Berner turned down $1 billion offer for his organization. Is that right, Wes?
Yeah, but it also wasn't $1 billion in cash.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure he would have been doing jumping jacks and skipping all the way to the bank if it was a true B. It was from a larger company that made a stock offer to him, similar to how High Times has acquired other media companies, which is, we will give you $1 billion, in High Times stock. And so, like, when Dope Magazine sold to High Times, it was reportedly sold for $11.2 million, with only $1.2 million of that reportedly actually being in cash. So Berner did the right thing by turning down $1 billion, and he might have a true $1 billion cannabis brand between all of his holdings, but he was smart enough to say, hey, I'm not going to sell my company and all my hard work for paper. And that's where we see a lot of false narratives and false evaluations going down.
And how is that a lesson for the average investor?
Well, the lesson there is that someone who has spent his entire life building a company in cannabis, has risked going to prison, has been arrested, and has put his entire life on the line, which I did a cool interview with Bernie you can check out on nwleaf.com. He said, no, I'm not going to take all my hard work and trade it for equity in another company that has no guarantee. So it goes back to what I said earlier. If you are thinking about investing in cannabis, as soon as you put that dollar in, you must expect it to already be gone. And then if you get a return from it, you're lucky. It's kind of like putting money in a slot machine. You pull the wheel and you see what happens. It is very unsafe to put money into cannabis in general. And anyone who ever bought their first ounce or their first pound and was like, I'm going to flip it and make tons of money, learned that.
We've all done it.
Oh, man. And some of us, we hustle a little, but these are big companies spending other people's money with that same principle. Oh, we're going to start a new cannabis company, and oh, we're going to sell this much pot, and oh, we're all going to get rich, and oh, let's all go do coke in the bathroom, and all fucking pretend like the reality isn't such that pot is an agricultural product that is starting to get really, really cheap. And that's actually a good thing, but not for investors and not for big companies right now. And so buyer beware is rule number one. Nobody gets rich off of penny stocks except the people selling penny stocks and taking money from others. Nobody is really getting rich in an industry that can sell $1 billion worth of a commodity and have $750 million of it go to taxes. There is not enough money being made, and it's really a fundamental problem that is going to kind of explode.
Sounds like the government's getting rich.
It's exploded into the psychedelic industry as well. So Bruce Linton is the ex-CEO of Canopy Growth, and so now he's with MindMed with Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank. And so you'll see these penny stocks, and they hit the news, and it's like, oh, it went up 100%, it went up 1,000%. And it's like, what does that mean? 14 cents? So yeah, from a news perspective, great, but from financially, it's penny stocks. It's caveat emptor, buyer beware.
Have you seen any cannabis company actually maintain and hold a stock value for a long period of time?
No, not one that's public, no.
I mean, even Tilray is a great stock, but it's not gone up 1,000%.
And Tilray was the company that minted the first cannabis billionaire. What's his fucking
Brandon Kennedy.
Brandon Kennedy, who was also the CEO of Leafly, which is also really, 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 really struggling right now, and had to lay off over half their staff here in Seattle because the value wasn't there for their stock.
He was with Privateer Holdings, too, and he hasn't done much for them either. I've been critical of Brandon Kennedy just for the simple fact that he hasn't driven Tilray to where they need to go. I think it's a strategy for him to sit around as long as he can and then be bought out by somebody when they have a ton of capital. In a time like this, you're going to start to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions or M&As because people don't know what else to do with their cash, and he's primed for a buyout. And
so basically these big companies are forcefully coming together, which is how a lot of the media roundup went coming over to High Times. These companies didn't have money. They were in debt. They were struggling. They said, well, let's take my company that's in debt and your company that's in debt and your company that has cash and combine them. And somehow we're all going to not replicate the same thing, which was a failure to adjust business models. And if you don't adjust something and you continue the same pattern and expect different results, that's lunacy. And that's what's happening in the cannabis industry right now is these companies are failing, merging, failing, and selling. And ultimately, these CEOs, just like in the mainstream world, are not failing. They're making lots of money. It's the stockholders and it's the employees and it's the people who actually make these companies up that are losing.
So at what point does cannabis become a sound investment for the average investor?
When it's actually legal. And another important thing to note is that the Canadian stock market is the only stock market that's allowing trading of cannabis companies. So that is not approved on the NASDAQ. That's not approved in the U.S. And it's still federally illegal in the U.S. So you have companies in the U.S. that are licensed to sell pot that trade their assets to subsidiaries in Canada that then become listed on the Canadian stock market. And the whole thing's a house of cards. It is entirely a house of cards, just like our current legalization is, where it's not really legal. It's just regulated, it's just controlled, and the people who are making the money off of it are also the people who lock up people for it, and that's the government. They're the ones making the most out of this, and until that changes, until pot's actually legal, investing in it is going to be very much risky business. And I would say if you are thinking about investing in pot, I'll tell you, like I tell everyone from family to friends to random people on the street, don't invest it. But if you're going to, go invest in a grow light. Invest in a closet operation to grow your own cannabis. And understand the plant and understand the value of it. And then you'll have a much better perspective on these really rich, mainly white, coked up people who will tell you we're going to make billions of dollars off of pot, off of a plant that most people can grow in their closet for, a couple $100.
Why you got to bring Coke into it? Just kidding. Stash.
Ricker, you made a good point before we started recording the show, that if you're in the gold rush, invest in the picks and shovels. You know, invest in the Levi Strauss that everyone needs the genes to mine the gold.
Invest in the Leaf. We have a magazine. We don't ever touch cannabis legally, but we report on it.
Well, and I would say to circle back, the companies that I have seen that have held stock values and have actually sold and been worth money have all been on the picks and shovels side. So like Gavita Lights, Hawthorne has bought up, which is an arm of Monsanto, bought up tons and tons of cannabis supply companies. So there is still value in this industry. Obviously, it's worth billions of dollars, but you have to really look and say what has value. And really, the price on pot is going to continue to get cheaper and cheaper as it becomes an agricultural product. So people aren't even prepared for the bottom that's going to drop out. And I personally know of many, many companies that have already failed. Most of the people I did business with just 3 or 4 years ago aren't in business. About 90% of people I did business with 5 years or longer are not in business. And a lot of these companies that are already saddled with debt and already struggling to sell pot in these current market conditions are going to be totally fucked down the road. And so people need to open their eyes and wake up, and that's within the industry and from the outside, and realize that the values that we think that we're holding are actually being undercut from underneath us.
So are picks and shovels companies public?
Well, it depends. The Leaf is privately held, since you mentioned that earlier, by us. But there are companies that are public.
Is Futurola public?
No, Futurola is not public. The real successful companies have stayed privately held, and they do what I have done, which is put my own blood, sweat, and tears, along with yours, Ricker, into this. And those are the people who are succeeding. And that's what's really interesting, is that the companies that are financially solvent and liquid are the small ones, and the ones that manage their overheads and manage their expectations, and also aren't just in it to get the Ferrari or get the boat or get the house. The people who are thinking long term. And then, there are also companies that are medium to large scale that are aggressively working on paying down their debts, building sustainable brands, keeping products on shelves. But for the most part, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. And at the end of the day, it's just a plant. And that's the beauty of it, is that it's a plant that you can grow and we can share. And most people who grow pot don't do a great job of it, just like most people who homebrew beer don't do a great job. So they're going to go to the store and buy it. But imagine if beer was $40 a six-pack. That's kind of where pot is right now. And it's going to get a lot cheaper as we move ahead.
One of those picks and shovel companies or ancillary businesses is Innovative Industrial Properties, or IIPR, ticker symbol. And they just go up and buy companies. So they're heavily involved with these sale leaseback options that we talked about in the first segment. And to the point earlier that we were mentioning with MedMen, they're heavily involved with those acquisitions of the commercial real estate at all-time highs. And so one of those plays with ancillary is betting for or against. You can actually buy a put or bet against IIPR if you think commercial real estate is at its high. So even if it's not on the upside, it could be on the downside. So there's a lot of strategies or plays out there for picks and shovels as well.
And, you know, Elon Musk is famous for kind of laughing at people who short Tesla stock. But I would say right now, if you were going to make a bet against cannabis investments winning, because the sky is not the limit.
Well, Josh, now it's time for you to play Would You Rather.
Would you rather?
Would you rather?
Would you rather do? Would you rather?
Okay, Josh. Would you rather live in quarantine with all the world's greatest cannabis products you ever dreamed of, or live in an open society with no cannabis whatsoever?
Oh, shit.
Boom.
Do you have other drugs, though? Or is it just no cannabis?
So I'm fairly resourceful. I'm going to go with the latter and say an open society with no cannabis, because I'm so resourceful, I think I can find it.
Stash, to answer your question, yes, you have Coke. As in Matt Coke. Josh, would you rather take a dab of Super Lemon Haze before skydiving, or take a dab of Blue Dream before scuba diving?
Oh, interesting. I probably would go with was it Super Silver Haze? Is that what it was?
Super Lemon Haze.
I'd go with the Super Lemon Haze before skydiving.
That sounds great.
I don't think I need to be energetic underwater, but I do need to be alert and kind of, in the mood, I guess, or even chill out if I'm skydiving.
Far out. Yeah. Let's go. You ready? I got a plane out. And finally, Josh, would you rather see Joe Biden win the presidential election or be on the Leaflife podcast?
Leaflife podcast, here we are.
Fuck Trump 2020.
Wes is wearing a T-shirt that says marijuana is safer than Trump.
And it's true.
Don't drink bleach.
Or do Coke.
Or hydrochloroxylene, which stock. Blah.
Josh, where can we find you on the internet?
TheTalkingHedge.com. Your cannabis business podcast.
Thank you so much for being on Leaf Life, bro.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
And now it's time for the Lorax Riddle of the Day. Okay, here we go. Wes, what can travel around the world by staying in a corner? Oh, I think we got you this time, Wes. I think we get you every time, Wes.
I'm not so good at riddles.
You haven't solved one yet, and you're not even high.
Maybe that's the problem. I'm stumped.
A stamp.
A stamp.
I was thinking a globe.
Hey, you were close.
Almost.
Nice. What is a stamp? I'm a millennial. Come on.
What are you talking about? I just went to the post office the other day and got a book of Sesame Street stamps.
Nice.
True story, man.
Nice.
They're like my favorite stamps of all time right now.
I want a Big Bird postcard from you.
I will put one on your windshield. Great show today, Wes. This is really, really informative. I mean, there is some information in this show that it's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, to reiterate, don't invest in pot. And if that's your takeaway, you're probably doing better than most of the people out there who bought Canopy stock.
Download this and all Leaf Life episodes at nwleaf.com or leaflifepodcast.com. Also, hear us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. Also, please find us on Instagram at Leaf Life Podcast.
And with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. I want to thank everybody here, Wes, Ashley, Mike, and Coke over here. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out. Please do.
I'm Joy Beckerman, and I'd like to invite you to join me with my hemp industry leading guests on Hemp Baron. During my over a quarter century at the forefront of the hemp movement and emerging hemp economy, I've had the privilege of working with many of the world's most dynamic, innovative, trailblazing hemp pioneers. And now, every week, I have the honor of speaking with them and sharing their stories with you on Hemp Baron. You can download the latest episode every Wednesday at mjbulls.com or from wherever you listen to podcasts.